Welcome to Halton Garden Week. My name is Andrea Rowe. I am the Director of Sustainable Environments for Halton Environmental Network. And joining me today is Wendy. And welcome, Wendy. You're going to help us unpack the topic of how art can help to inspire environmental action within the community. So we're so pleased to have you. Why don't you let our listeners, our participants, know a little bit more about you?
Absolutely. It's wonderful to be here for Halton Garden Week. And my name is Wendy Donnan. I am the Executive Director of OFA, which is Oakville Festivals of Film and Art. So we are the only independent film festival in Oakville. We're going into our 8th year, and we're a social issues oriented festival. So that means we every year we deal with a variety of different social issues and bring those to the forefront through film, through conversation, through Q&As, through dance, song, and performance. So we do all sorts of things to draw attention to issues. So for this year, for Earth Day, actually, we've been working with Halton Environmental Network. For this year, for Earth Day, we're working with Halton Environmental Network. We're screening the film Percy. The film revolves around Saskatoon farmer Percy Schmeiser. And he basically got involved with a lawsuit against a large seed company that accused him of using their patented seeds in his garden. And I mean, there's a lot of controversy with this story. But basically, it's kind of a David and Goliath kind of story where he is standing up to this seed company. So we're really doing this to draw attention to some of the issues with environmental sustainability and issues around soil depletion and problem ecological environments that are caused by a lot of large companies, but also industrialization of our food systems. So there's a lot of things to unpack in this film. But that's what we do as a film festival. Our job is to draw attention to problems in our society, and with this particular film, we're looking at some of those issues.
For today, I'd like to come back to this concept of why different art forms are used by artists. So what is the filmmaker in this particular movie? What is he trying to tell us? It's not just a story for the story's sake, but how can we use art to then inspire action within our community, within Halton?
Sure. So I really call films like this, documentary films like this, they're a form of environmental art. Because what they do is they bring the viewer in to raise awareness of issues that are impacting our environment and to actually encourage people to go out there and actually do something about it, not to just sit passively and watch the film. So what we want to do as filmmakers, and certainly through a festival, is inspire active viewing. So that means we don't want passive viewers. We don't want people to just sit there, watch the film and say, oh, that was really good. So what we do as a festival is we inspire people to create change. So the thing about art is it brings attention to current environmental issues, yes, but it also draws attention to historical issues that maybe people aren't aware of. So it brings attention to the history of a particular environmental concern, for example, that's raised in the film, but also the historic kind of chain of that event and how it happened. And that kind of art and that kind of film is what I think really inspires change, because it allows people to see how ingrained an issue is in society, and we need to do something about it. The other thing that there's a form of art in our filmmaking community called impact producing. What does that mean, impact producing? So what that means is it's going to be a project like many others that are out there that is widely distributed in the community. So that means community screenings with Q&As. It means an extensive marketing outreach with a lot of discussions, with a website, an interactive website in most cases. So we're planning an interactive website to bring people in to get them involved. So it'll have games, it'll have things that to get children involved, for example. That's really important because children are the future and children are the ones that we need to get to. So with a screening like this, we're reaching into family communities. So now Percy, it's not a documentary, it's a feature film. So, but that doesn't mean it can't be impact produced, and it is impact produced. So the same thing with Percy is happening as happens with documentaries, not to the same extent though, but we're starting to do that more and more.
So impact producing, the goal is the engagement.
Yes.
And taking action. So with the movie Percy, his struggle is again about his right to save his own seeds. Yes. And to use those.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of speakers this week during Halton Garden Week that talk about how to do that. So it's a great connection to our Halton Garden Week, just with that whole theme of watch the movie, be inspired, but now here are all of these resources to show you how to do it. So what are some other topics, themes that people could take away from the movie Percy to get them inspired and engaged, I guess, in the movement within the region? What are some other things that we could talk about?
I think one of the important things with Percy is just drawing attention to the plight of farmers in an industrialized food system. So what Percy brings to the forefront is that a lot of farmers that were able to subsist on their own with a smaller type of farming where they're not completely industrialized, but they're still creating food for their communities, selling food in their communities, have been bypassed in favor of a system that really focuses on these huge industrialized farms. And it's a huge issue because in North America, it's a huge issue. In the rest of the world, it's a megalith issue. I just saw the most amazing documentary this week, First We Eat. So it really encompasses a lot of the things we just talked about, which is Indigenous sovereignty and our sovereignty in communities to be able to grow the food that we need to eat. So this family in the Yukon decides for a year they're just going to subsist off the environment around them, to be able to farm their food, to be able to catch their food, but they're not going to eat any processed, any canned, any food that's brought in outside the community. So it's just a fascinating documentary because it's amazing what they're able to do around them, what they're able to do to subsist, to create, for example, they create their own salt, natural salt to actually flavor their food, sugar through honey, through maple syrup farming, through sap. So there's all these really fascinating ways that they look at subsisting and living in their environment. And that is something that we've lost sight of. The interesting thing is that I find with the pandemic right now, we are moving a little more back to respecting Indigenous ways of finding food and learning about those things and bringing them back. And I'm seeing a lot more of that. Like the community gardens are a good example of that. Community gardens are expanding everywhere around the world. So not just in North America, but people are growing gardens in their front yards and their backyards. Wherever they have space, they're putting gardens in. And just this idea that we can grow our own food. It's healthy food. We're not eating highly processed, fatty foods, salt and sugar. It's much better for us. And it's perfect. It's a perfect film to see.
Yeah, it reinforces the concept of a local food system.
Yes.
When you're growing, hunting, fishing, gathering your own food, it does remind us that we've lost a lot of that knowledge about what plants are edible. So food systems, Indigenous food sovereignty, actually food sovereignty in general, it's a term that's being used more and more, and it means something different to each group. How would you describe, or what is your understanding of the term food sovereignty?
I always look at food sovereignty beside food security
Hmm.
because for me, we are so focused now on the issue of food security. And this is a process that started around the time of the Second World War worldwide, where we're more focused on good intentions of making sure that everybody has food to eat, that there's food equality. So it's the industrialization and corporatization of the food system, but by doing that, what we've done is we've lost food sovereignty. So for me, food sovereignty is having control of your local food systems to be able to, for example, provide food in your community. So for local farmers to be able to sell their produce in the community and not find that they've been completely undercut by prices from these huge farms in the US, for example, that are undercutting the prices and making people say, well, I don't want to buy local food, it's too expensive, but it's organic, it's
Yes.
healthier for you. So
Yeah.
that to me, that's what food sovereignty is. It's having control over local food systems as opposed to security, which is more of a global it's a global trend that to me is not working, it's failing.
The
Okay.
Halton Environmental Network, we focus on climate change and teaching, providing educational resources about climate change in ways that residents can get involved in reducing their own impact. And so part of what we teach at Halton Food is that we want to have our seeds from a local grower and saved from local plants, because these seeds are going to be adapted to the current growing conditions of that region. They're going to be locally adapted. Does the movie Percy cover any kind of an environmental viewpoint from that kind of perspective?
Well, the movie's not really focused on climate change per se. It does deal with issues of how climate change is affecting, for example, the soil, and how our actions, for example, with our industrialized food system, are impacting the soil. The
Mm.
issue of local seeds is also important because there's issues in Percy related to being able to repurpose and reuse seeds, and how some companies are actually patenting seeds so that farmers are not able to do that.
But back to your point about the soil as well, one of the first pieces of um, information or advice when I started investigating how to grow my backyard garden more organically was I was told, don't feed the plant, meaning don't fertilize the plant. You need to feed the soil. You
Yeah,
have to add that organic matter back into the soil. And when the
yeah,
soil is rich and full of life, then your plants will thrive. Now, some are
exactly.
willing to exist on a few fewer nutrients in the soil, but rather than dumping tons and tons of fertilizer to get this beautiful lush tomato plant, just feed the soil and your
Yeah,
plant will do just fine. So it is,
exactly.
I guess, coming back to that, the more we take care of the earth and the soil and put all of those greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere and back into the soil where they belong, the
Yep,
better off we're all going to be.
for sure. Yeah, I teach, I don't know if I mentioned, I don't think I did. I teach a course at York called Communication, Food, and Culture. So it's all about how we interact with our communities with food, but also how the media impacts that
Mm.
relationship. So in that course, I'm looking at a lot of things related to marketing of food, advertising of food, food companies, and how they promote certain types of food to eat over others. So I did an exercise with my class last week where we opened our fridges and we just looked in the fridge and picked a food, and we looked it up online to find out how much it cost, and especially during the pandemic, because
Mm.
food
Mhm.
prices have been rising during the pandemic, and it's concerning for a lot of people, and it's related to food supply chain issues primarily. But the students got all excited because they were realizing when they went in their food that, for example, that the broccoli in the fridge that they were looking at had gone up in price by a substantial amount, but then they would look up something like a can of beans, for example, and it was the same price. So they were really upset about the fact that why is fresh food, why the price of fresh food going up, but not processed food? And that all relates back to some of the issues we just talked about, but just eating habits, but also how companies are promoting much more, the eating of unhealthy foods. And that's a scary thing as we move forward.
It reminds us that eating locally, eating seasonally, it takes a bit of effort, that you can't
Yes.
just have fresh strawberries for $1.88 in the middle of winter.
Exactly.
You know, it takes somebody to grow them, somebody to transport them from a warm climate. Now, I have learned that there are fantastic greenhouses in Ontario that are growing strawberries year round.
Yeah.
So that's great, but they're probably not going to cost $1.88.
No.
So we do have to recognize that food does have a price, and there's a cost to growing it. There's the human labor, there's all of the resources that go into it. There's the cost of getting it onto your plate. So if you're buying from a farmer's market, you have to realize that the cost of the food is so much more than the cost of the produce.
Exactly. And I think, that's a process of educating people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that we can do through our festival, through film, through the arts. And as I mentioned, like environmental art is really a way to protect our environment by drawing attention to all of these issues in a way that people find enjoyable. So watching a film, watching a documentary and learning about it, participating in a Q&A. So I think it's really important to create that kind of awareness. So we're not about slacktivism. So slacktivism being kind of that, I'm going to sign that online petition to support climate change, and then you go away and you forget about it. We're about creating activity, creating as I mentioned, like an active viewer. That's what OFA is all about, is making you an active viewer, not a passive viewer.
Well, I'm looking forward to the Earth Day event, and I'm hoping that today's talk will help people understand that we are looking to create many spaces like this for dialogue and discussion and learning, with the end goal being, what action are you going to take? Hopefully Halton Garden Week will give them some tips and tricks, but the first thing, we got to make spaces to learn, and art is a great way to start that conversation. So thank you so much for joining me.
And thank you very much, Andrea.